Philippine Ship Spotters Society. The biggest shipping company based in Mindanao Part 1. Posted on April 3, 2019 by PSSS admin. Many people will think that the biggest shipping company in Mindanao is 2GO, the only liner company left in the country with its big ships with large gross tonnages, one of the measures of a shipping company's size. Maybe some will also argue that it has to be the Chelsea Logistics Corp., which controls a slew of shipping companies now including 2GO, but I disagree because those shipping companies are not necessarily based in Mindanao. How can one argue that Starlight Ferries or Trans-Asia Shipping Lines, Inc. are Mindanao shipping companies? That argument will be more absurd for 2GO itself as it mainly operates out of Manila and Cebu. It just happened that the 2GO and Chelsea Logistics chairman, the now very prominent Dennis Uy, happens to be from Davao, where the current president also happens to hail from. Report this AD. The biggest shipping company of Mindanao is actually the Aleson Shipping Lines of Zamboanga City, founded by Feliciano N. Tan Sr. Now, they happen to be very low-key, one of the reasons why only a few has heard of them except in their own turf. Another key reason is actually very few, especially from Luzon and Visayas, have ever been to Zamboanga City because of inordinate fear of reported violence, jihadis, or even plain Muslims that was inculcated by their families and exacerbated by the media. Actually, many Christians will rather fly to Hong Kong than go to Zamboanga. Well, many local Christians even fear going to Zamboanga port. And lastly, most people when thinking of shipping do not bother to understand that shipping is not only about ferries. Shipping is actually about all kinds of crafts including freighters, of which Aleson Shipping Lines has many, and so the company seems smaller to not a few. And those are the reasons why this particular shipping line skips the public consciousness even though it is actually bigger than the Cebu-based overnight ferry companies. The first vessel acknowledged by Aleson Shipping Corporation was the Estrella del Mar, which was a cruiser ship with a clipper stem. Sadly, she was recently gone and was given the IMO number 8,945,220. She was a local-built vessel in 1975 by the Veradero de Recodo in Zamboanga City, and she was 38.1 meters in length and 230 in gross tonnage, a measure I am loath to use because there are a lot of under-declarations for considerations in the country, and so I emphasize the length more, which is almost always true, and people can relate more to that than the gross tonnage or GT. The Estrella del Mar originally sailed at 10.5 knots derived from her single Yanmar engine of 850 horsepower. Photo by Mike Bailon of PSSS. The Estrella del Mar was originally owned by and registered to Feliciano N. Tan Sr. and was later transferred when the company came into existence. The Aleson Shipping Lines is owned and controlled by the Tan family of Zamboanga City, and officially they declare their founding to be October 1, 1976. It was a saying in the port of Zamboanga that the Tan family will never let go of the Estrella del Mar as it was their lucky ship, but it seems obsolescence finally caught up with her as it is hard to sail now without a respectable amount of cargo because fuel prices is high and the design of the vessel as a cruiser does not afford much cargo. The Estrella del Mar was the only local-built ferry of the Aleson Shipping Lines. The Tan family was already in the goods trading and distribution business even before they got involved in the shipping business, that it seems that the latter was an adjunct to the former when they started. In the process of their growth they overtook many Zamboanga shipping companies which started way before them, like the Sampaguita Shipping Corporation, which was once the biggest in Zamboanga and Mindanao. It is gone now. A victim of overexpansion, the shipping company of the Atilano family, which later moved to Cebu and became more known as the Rose Shipping Company, it lost there and is gone now too. The Magnolia Shipping Corporation, the Ever Lines, and the Basilan Shipping Basilan Lines, which is also gone now. It also had contemporaries like the SKT Shipping Lines and the A. Socoloran Shipping Corp. This company had fast crafts as well as traditional ships and Moro boats, which are also both gone now too. Those are just among the most prominent ones, as there are many more small and less prominent shipping companies in Zamboanga, and that includes the operators of the many Moro boats, the Mindanao version of the motor boats or lancha, Patel of Luzon, and the Visayas, which are patterned after the Arab dhow. Many of those big and small Zamboanga shipping companies are gone now, victims of the surplus of bottoms in the late 1990s when the incentives of President Fidel V. Ramos on shipping plus the business optimism after the Ram coups were over resulted in overcapacity and brutal fare wars. Additionally, the barter trade of Zamboanga was already down and restricted. The Asian crisis of 1997 also resulted in lower growth, and soon the disastrous IRAP presidency came. Among the prominent Zamboanga shipping companies, it is only the Magnolia Shipping Corporation and Ever Lines that are still in existence, but they are no longer growing. Meanwhile, the Aleson Shipping Lines continued its growth and acquisitions, although they had missteps too, like when they acquired big ferries, the Lady Mary Joy and Lady Mary Joy II, and when they ventured in Luzon and the Visayas, which came to naught, as there was also a surplus of bottoms there. I have noticed that in shipping the companies that exhibit continuous growth are those whose families are not dependent on shipping but have solid core businesses elsewhere. This is true for the Lua family of Cebu, which controls OceanJet but have many other businesses including their famed bottled water business, the Nature Spring brand. That is also true for the Sta. Clara Shipping Corporation, Penafrancia Shipping Corporation combine of Bicol, where the principal partner happens to have the biggest trading firm in the region and the other partners have their own businesses too. The Poseidon LCTs of Concrete Solutions, Inc. and Primary Trident Marine Solutions Inc. of the Lu family from Cebu is also another example of one into shipping, but the core businesses are elsewhere. One notable thing I noticed about Mindanao is the other regions were not able to nurture big shipping concerns. Look at the row of highly urbanized cities, HUCs, or cities with a population of over 200,000 in the island. Cagayan de Oro has no big shipping corporation, and the same is also true for Butuan. Ditto for Cotabato City and Iligan City. General Santos City is only big in fishing fleets and shipyards, and that is understandable because of their access to the Celebes Sea fishing grounds. If Davao City was able to produce any, it is only the Chelsea Shipping Corp., which followed and supplied its pioneering sister company, the Phoenix Petroleum. Even the key gateway of Surigao City has no big shipping company either, and Ozamis City was only able to produce Dama Shipping Corporation with its fleet of small double-ended ferries in Panguil Bay. Now, Zamboanga City is a gateway to, and there are many islands that she supplies, the reason why there are many shipping lines in the city. The need for connection to these islands, Aleson Shipping Lines was able to exploit successfully and for a long time now. The second ferry of Aleson Shipping Lines came in 1984 when they purchased from Carlos A. Gothong Lines Inc. CAGLI, the second Dona Conchita, as differentiated from the original lengthened X.F. ship Dona Conchita, which was the original flagship of the company. This was a cruiser passenger cargo ship which they renamed into the Aleson Zamboanga and later as the Aleson III. This was a ship built in 1963, the same year as Dona Paz, when ro-ros, roll-on, roll-off ships, were not yet in vogue by Mitsubishi Heavy Industries as the Taishumaru with IMO number 6,402,420. She had a length overall, LOA, of 59.3 meters, about the same size of the cruiser ships of Trans-Asia Shipping Lines Inc. when it was just starting, to put the size in context. This ship literally has longer legs, and for that her 14 knots from a single Hitachi engine of 1,500 horsepower comes handy. It can go to places that the Estrella del Mar can't and also carry more cargo. Moreover, the passengers have more comfort as the ship is air-conditioned. Carlos A. Gothong Lines Inc. sold this cruiser ship because they were already converting then into a pure Ro-Ro fleet, the first local shipping company to do so. Later, Aleson Shipping sold this ferry to Indonesia. It is understandable if for a time after acquiring the Aleson Zamboanga that Aleson Shipping Lines did not invest yet in additional ferries. The period of the 1980s was a very unsettled one as financial and political crises were dominant in the national and economic life of the country. That was the fact of life in the country in that decade when many businesses even doubted if they will even survive. And I would even say that the purchase of Aleson Shipping Lines of their next ferry in 1990 was still a continuation of the 1980s business malaise and the general conservatism then in investments. Photo by Hans Schaefer. The ship, the first Crystal Jane, was just a small but beautiful ferry at 33.0 meters LOA length overall with a design speed of 11 knots from a single Hanshin engine. She was built by Shin Kochi Juko in Kochi, Japan in 1979 as the Orange No. 2 with the IMO number 7,926,980. A short-distance ferry which looks like a fast craft or a medium-speed craft MSC, this vessel had a passenger capacity of 386 and was mainly used for the Basilan route of the company. However, Aleson Shipping did not keep her very long because in 2000 this first Crystal Jane was sold to Indonesia and became the Indomas 3. By that year it also appeared that Aleson Shipping already had a small excess of ferries already. It was only in 1994 when there were already incentives from the Fidel V. Ramos administration. Actually in Cory Aquino's administration we had a shortage of ships brought about by the financial crisis of the closing years of the Ferdinand E. Marcos administration when inflation was rampant when Aleson Shipping Lines made a big move in the ferry business. This was also about the same time when other shipping companies nationwide made their moves too as business optimism was already rising then as the gringo coups and the paralyzing blackouts were already over. In this year, Aleson Shipping Lines acquired 2 ferries and that suddenly doubled their then small ferry fleet. Photo by Mike Bailon of PSSS. This ferry duo was led by the Danica Joy, which seemed to have been named after a granddaughter of the founder who has a hand in the company now. The Danica Joy was built as the Nakajima in Japan in 1972 by the Nakamura Shipbuilding and Engineering Works in Yanai, Japan, and she had the IMO number 7,852,414. This ferry is bigger than the basic, short-distance ferry Roro at 48.0 meters LOA, and so she has 2 passenger decks and 2 engines. She was the ship used by Aleson Shipping Lines in opening their Sandakan, Malaysia route. For a time her twin Daihatsu engines of 2,000 horsepower, which was sufficient for 14 knots when new became unreliable, but Aleson Shipping Lines opened the checkbooks and now she is a reliable ship again. Right now, the Danica Joy is already the oldest ship remaining in the fleet of Aleson Shipping Lines by age. Both ferries and container ships, and date of acquisition is the older ship by acquisition. Aleson 3 and Crystal Jane are already gone from the fleet, as were the older cargo ships of the company. The Danica Joy is the long-distance ferry replacement for the Aleson 3, which foundered in Cebu in 1994. She has a sister ship in the country which is the Light Ferry 6 of Light Ferries, and she was also the former Sab Juliana of the MBRS lines of Romblon. Photo by Albert Sala of PSSS. The other ferry acquisition by Aleson Shipping Lines in 1994 was the Naveen, which was smaller than the Danica Joy. The Naveen was a cruiser ship and she was built by Maybata Shipbuilding in Sasebo, Japan in 1975. This small ferry with the IMO number 7,509,976, which was originally the Mishima Maru number 3, had a length of only 35.0 meters and was also used for the short Basilan route. A basic, short-distance ferry, Naveen has only 1 passenger deck and a single 1,000 horsepower Daihatsu engine, which was good for 13 knots when new. With a thinner breadth or beam, a cruiser will be faster than a Roro of the same length and engine. In the last few years of her life, the Naveen's engine had been sickly and she spent most of her time laid up in Veradero de Recodo and for sale. She is gone now from the fleet of Aleson Shipping, and maybe they no longer re-engined her as she was obsolescent already, as she is a cruiser ship. Photo by Carl Sabuga of PSSS. In 1995, the company bought a small Roro of 32.3 meters length, and she was unusual for a basic, short-distance ferry Roro, as she had stern ramps versus the normal bow ramp. This was the Alex Craig, which was built in 1972 by the Izumi Shipbuilding in Moji, Japan as the Himeshima Maru No. 1, a ferry to a small island off the Japanese main island of Kyushu. This ferry was the smallest of Aleson Shipping up to that date, with gross tonnage of only 197. She was also the smallest in passenger capacity in the fleet, as she was only good for 154 persons. Besides, the Alex Craig also had the smallest engine in the fleet with only 750 horsepower from its single Yanmar marine engine. However, she was not the slowest in the fleet, as her design speed is 12 knots. This small ferry was one of the ships brought by Aleson in its expansion outside of Mindanao, specifically in Marinduque. When they lost her, they sold the Alex Craig and she was acquired by the Davemer Shipping of Camiguin, where she is now sailing as the Dona Pepita. Her sister in the country is also sailing in Camiguin, the ferry Yuham of Philstone Shipping. 1996 was the year when Aleson Shipping Lines acquired a rather big Roro for multi-day voyages that is not confined to Mindanao. This is the 84.3-meter Lady Mary Joy with a gross tonnage of 2,300, the first ship of the company which is over 1,000 GT and the biggest ship of the company up to that time. This ship was used by Aleson Shipping in their long Cebu Dumaguete Dapitan Zamboanga Sandakan route, the longest route of the company ever. Supposedly, this route gives Central Visayas an access to the Sabah market in Malaysia. I thought this was part of the BIMPEAGA concept being pushed then by the President Ramos in preparation for the ASEAN Free Trade Area. However, the president failed to define correctly what is free trade, and it just remained as restricted trade, and so the route was not successful in the long run. This ferry was also used by Aleson Shipping in their Zamboanga-Manila route. Photo by Chief Ray Smith of PSSS. The First Lady Mary Joy was a ship built by Taguma Shipbuilding in Inoshima, Japan in 1971 as the Frisia Maru of the ferry company Tosai Kisen KK of Japan, and she was given the IMO number 7,101,786. In 1986, she became the Happiness No. 2 of the Bright Eagle International Inc. of Panama. In the Philippines, the ship was refitted to be a multi-day liner, the first ship of Aleson Shipping in that classification. The Lady Mary Joy was the first ship of the company with a net tonnage (NT) of over 1,000 at 1,213, and the first ferry of the company with a passenger capacity of over 1,000 at 1,116 persons. She was also the fastest ferry of Aleson Shipping then, with a design speed of 17 knots coming from a pair of Niigata engines with a total of 6,000 horsepower. Sadly, this remarkable ship is gone now. In 1997, Aleson Shipping Lines acquired a ship they will use to battle Sampaguita Shipping Company and SKT Shipping in what was thought of then as a premier route in western Mindanao, the Zamboanga-Pagadian route, which offered an alternative to bumpy, dusty and sometimes dangerous land route. This was the ferry Taiko, which they then renamed into the Nickel Princely. This ship is actually a Roro with just a small stern ramp. She was built by Kanda Shipbuilding Company in their Hiroshima yard in Japan in 1979 with the IMO number 7,900,455 with an original 12.5 knots top speed from a pair of Daihatsu engines with a total of only 2,000 horsepower, the reason why she became a slow ship in the future. Nickel Princely is only 49.0 meters in length and she has 2 passenger decks. She had a passenger capacity of 400 which was accommodated in bunks as the route is an overnight ferry route of about 8 hours sailing time. Taken from Pagadian.com. The Zamboanga-Pagadian route had the best Zamboanga ferries in the late 1990s as the Nickel Princely battled the Sampaguita Ferry 1, the former Tacloban City of William Lines, and Sampaguita Ferry 2, the former Iligan City of William Lines, of the Sampaguita Shipping Lines and the Pagadian City, the former Madrigal Masbate of Madrigal Shipping, of SKT Shipping. However, in due time, the ferries in the Zamboanga-Pagadian route all lost when the Zamboanga-Pagadian highway was finally paved. I was not surprised by this development as it has been shown in the past and everywhere in the country that in parallel routes the ship cannot compete with the ubiquitous buses and trucks which depart at all times of the day and night, could even be cheaper and it can be hailed right or deliver goods at the gates of the homes of the passengers or shippers. For a time, the Nickel Princely was laid up or was serving as a reliever until the Roble Shipping Corp. of Cebu purchased her in 2009 and she became the Blessed Stars. Later, she was passed on to the new shipping company the Asian Stars and she tried to come back to Zamboanga as the Asian Stars in 2016 doing the Jolo route until she was acquired back by Roble Shipping and she became the Ocean Stars. The sister ship in the Philippines of the Nickel Princely was the former Filipinas Surigao of Coquiliong Shipping Lines Inc. which became the Asian Stars 2 of the new shipping company the Asian Stars that is plying the Zamboanga Jolo route. 1998 was a big year for Aleson Shipping Lines as they made their biggest ever expansion in their history when they acquired 4 ferries. By this year, it seems that the Aleson Shipping was already the biggest shipping company in Mindanao, arguably, displacing the old number 1, the Sampaguita Shipping Company. Both companies had many ferries now as well as cargo ships, as both operated cargo ships but one purchase made Aleson Shipping Lines and that was the acquisition of the Lady Mary Joy 2, the biggest ferry the company has ever acquired and which was as big as some of the smaller liners plying the Manila-Cebu route. Sampaguita Shipping had no ship to match this new flagship of Aleson Shipping which was mainly used for the Zamboanga-Manila route of the company where it battled the liners of WG&A, Sulpicio Lines and Negros Navigation Company. Photo by Toshihiko Mikami of PSSS. The Lady Mary Joy 2 was a full-pledged liner and so Aleson Shipping became one of the handful of shipping companies in modern times to operate liners from Manila and Cebu. Overnight ferries can't claim that distinction nor did they have ferries of this size. This ship was not small, she is even bigger than some Manila liners, as she really liner-sized at 122.0 meters length with a gross tonnage of 3,330 with a passenger capacity of 850 persons. In size and external lines she was much like the heralded Sweet Roro of Sweet Lines but she was actually marginally longer. The Lady Mary Joy 2 built by Fukuoka Zosen in Fukuoka, Japan in 1974 is the Akatsu Maru of Kyoto Kisen KK and she possessed the IMO number 7,400,2025. Her design speed is a match for liners of her size at 18.5 knots as she had 12,000 horsepower from a pair of Niigata engines. This liner is gone now, broken up, as Aleson Shipping was not able to hold on to their Manila route as there were plenty of liners during her time. Stephanie Marie by Mike Bailon of PSSS. Another acquisition in 1998 was a ship that firmed up the position of the company in Western Mindanao shipping and is still a great asset to the company until today. This is the Stephanie Marie which was the former Marima 3 in Japan. This ship was built in Japan by TNE Kanda Shipbuilding Company in their Kerr yard. The length of the ship is 63.2 meters, not unlike many Cebu overnight ferries but she is built as a short-distance ferry with seats which means she has a lot of space and capacity and before the coming of Stephanie Marie 2 she dwarfed then all the ferries going to Basilan. This vessel has 2.5 passenger decks with a tourist class in the former lounge of the ship which even houses a small office. The Stephanie Marie was built in 1979 with the IMO number 8,427,278 and she is powered by a pair of Daihatsu engines with a total of 3,200 horsepower giving her design speed was 15 knots. By acquisition she is now the second oldest extant ferry in the fleet of Aleson Shipping Lines. For a long time now this ferry is the mainstay of the company in the Isabela, Basilan route. Photo by Mike Bailon of PSSS. Another vessel that was also not small was the Danica Joy 2 which was refitted as an overnight ferry and which can also do longer voyages is in as far as Sandakan, Malaysia and as such she has the accommodations similar to a multi-day liner. She did that route when the liners of Aleson Shipping were already gone. This vessel is about the same size as the Stephanie Marie at 67.2 meters length and she had 2 passenger decks equipped with bunks. The Danica Joy II was built by Nakamura Shipbuilding and Engineering Works in Yonai, Japan in 1982. She was formerly the Orange Hope of the Shikoku Ferry in Japan and she had the permanent ID IMO 8,135,253. This ferry had a sustained speed of 16 knots when coming from 2 Daihatsu engines with a total of 4,000 horsepower. In 201, she became unbalanced while unloading and she capsized while docked in Zamboanga port and now she is already gone from the fleet of aleson shipping lines. She has a sister ship in the country, the Asia Philippines of Trans-Asia Shipping Lines of Cebu which was now sold to George and Peter Lines, also of Cebu. Not all of Aleson Shipping Line's acquisitions in 1998 were big or relatively big ships. One was a basic, short-distance ferry Ro-Ro of only 32.0 meters in length overall, LOA, which is the Crystal Jane II. This ferry was built by the Nagasaki Shipyard and Machinery Works in Nagasaki, Japan as the Himawari in 1974 with the IMO number 7,396,020. When Crystal Jane II was acquired, she one of the 5 small ferries in the fleet of the Aleson Shipping Lines with the second smallest passenger capacity at 188 persons, next only to the Alex Craig. However, this ferry had the slowest design speed in the fleet at only 10 knots. But unlike other short-distance ferry Ro-Ros, the Crystal Jane II had 2 engines and 2 screws. She had a total of 800 horsepower from her Mitsubishi engines. After these big acquisitions, Aleson Shipping Lines went into a relative hiatus of 4 years as far as ferry additions are concerned. Acquiring the 4 previously mentioned ferries might have brought financial pressure to the company but it seems there is more than to that. In this period there was obviously a surplus of bottoms already in the country plus the acquisition of liner ferries was not panning out well for the company. Moreover, the Luzon and Visayas forays of Aleson Shipping Lines were not doing well also. The emergence of SRN Fastcrafts which is better known as Wisam Express plus the acquisition of Fastcrafts by the A. Socoloran Shipping Corp., which also possessed conventional crafts also put pressure on the company until most of these Fastcrafts were moved into the Visayas and also Luzon in the case of A. Socoloran. To be continued.